I really want to start tonight with giving you an overview of what happened in 2014. I think to understand the journey that lettings has been on in recent times is really important before we look at where we are now and, more importantly, where we're going to go. So, moving through, apologies. There we go. The lettings market has enjoyed a consistent demand from motivated tenants, and I think that's been very positive news for landlords for several years now. Rents critically across the Yorkshire region last year ended having risen 3.4%. Us at Manning Stainton, our team in lettings, we actually helped over 8,000 tenants last year looking for their next home and did over 6,600 viewings with them. That's an awful lot of people doing an awful lot of viewings. So that really supports that consistent demand. The average length of tenancy is a really interesting one. It's something that's actually been going up for about the last 5 years or so. It's a record high for us at the moment at 23 months against a national average of about 19. So tenants are beginning to stay a little bit longer, be a little bit more settled in what they're doing. I think that's good news for landlords. I think that means that landlords at the moment are having a host of interested parties on their property. They're being able to consider who they would like to be their tenant. And by that, I mean, it's a bit of a sort of popularity contest. You've got 4 people all vying for one property. And the landlord's able to see who would be the right person for them and their property. So moving on to 2015 and what we think 2015 holds for our landlords and the landlords in the wider marketplace. Tenant demand is absolutely here to stay. I think there's more of the same great opportunities for landlords as we've seen in recent times. As Mark has mentioned in the slides earlier, there's clearly a reduction in the amount of property that's for sale in the market. You hear that in the media now, that there's not been enough new build in recent times. I think that's beginning to change. I hope it is. It needs to happen. And ultimately, with the mortgage stuff, the mortgage market review, I think people probably heard of. That, again, has tightened restrictions on lending. It means people are lending in a much more sensible way, perhaps. And that just really affects the lettings industry insofar as it makes more people tenants, makes them more motivated, which is great news for landlords. I think 2015 is going to be a great year for landlords. Now, I would say that I'm massively biased, and I hope there's some landlords in here. But I think it's going to be good potentially if you can find a property. What does today's tenant look like? I think importantly, that could be any one of us in this room. I think that's really, really significant. Renting is now a fundamental and acceptable lifestyle choice within our society. There used to be a big stigma attached to renting. I don't think people used to like to say that. Now it's commonplace. It's essential to our housing needs. 60% of 25 to 34-year-olds now live in the private rented sector. Significant. 20% of tenants in the PRS are families. 19% of all households in this country are in the private rented sector. Some big figures. Sorry to bamboozle you with stats, but I think that just shows you the shift, the nature of what people are doing, those habits that are being formed. And critically, tenants are staying longer. And those that are looking know that it's tough and they're up against some motivated competition. And I'd like to share with you, I'm one for telling stories, I often get told off for doing that, so apologies. But I was sat in the office some weeks back, it was snowing heavily. I was looking out of my office window, 10 to 8 in the morning, there was a chap pacing up and down outside the office. I left him a few minutes, wasn't sure of his intentions. Went to the front door and asked, can I help you? And he said, yes, I looked at a property yesterday, I'd like to apply. You're open from 8 o'clock, so I thought, well, you better come in. Sat down and had a really good chat with him, listened to what he had to say, what his proposition was for his landlord, and took all that information so one of our negotiators, when the branch opened, could get straight on to the landlord. What did that chap look like? Well, he was snow-covered, he was wet, and he was cold, obviously. He was also a university lecturer. He'd been a tenant for 5 years. He was only moving because his landlord was moving back in. He knew there'd been 6 viewings on that property in 2 days, and he wanted it more than anybody else. So he turned up at 10 to 7, made me smile because that was going to enable me to hopefully find him a home. And who was the successful applicant out of the 4 applications that came for the landlord? The snowman was. I think that is a modern day example of somebody that was a good tenant. Well, I hope he's going to be a good tenant. I'm not sure if he's moved in yet. So to illustrate that tenant demand, got a graph. And it shows you from April 12 through to present day, the number of tenants we're registering against the available properties that we have. So you can see that in April 12, it was just over 8. You've got the seasonal dips in December 12 and December 13, typically, or used to be, that December was kind of quiet. Actually, it wasn't this year. Our guys were working very hard, moving people in right up to Christmas Eve and between. So don't know what went on there. But anyway, present day, we're at just over 14 people per property. I think that's pretty phenomenal. And for a landlord saying there's 14 people waiting for my property, it's something that would excite me potentially. So moving on, I've done a bit of a map, bit like Mark. Now, apologies, it looks like I've pretty much highlighted everywhere in Leeds here. I kind of have, because Leeds is a great city to invest in. But starting over in the east towards Crossgates in the LS15 postcode, you can see that the average rent there for us is £635. You push west and north slightly towards the LS7, which is your Meanwood and your Chapel Allerton. Rents increase there to £681 on average. Through to the north of Leeds into Moortown and Alwoodley, £735. And out west to Horsforth, ever popular, £653. Down into Pudsey, £544. Wortley, £512. Beeston, again, another very popular place for investment landlords and also for tenants, at £542. And then not forgetting Morley at the south there, again, very popular at £530. So that's some, but not all. There's lots of other places in Leeds that people invest, and I think you've got to be, I think as Mark said really, you've got to be astute as to where you're going to put your money, what your investment's going to realise. So there's always opportunity, but with increased opportunity comes a little bit of risk. And I think it's balancing that, looking at that tenant, what do they look like, what do you want them to look like. So I've come up with a couple of scenarios. In Crossgates, with all those great transport links, a busy community, a 3-bedroom semi-detached property for sale at 74,950 would be a suggested rent of £550 per calendar month, achieving a yield of 9.61%. If you move over to Horsforth, which is ever popular, great transport links, a lively, balanced infrastructure, a lot of people like Horsforth, very well-searched area, a 1-bedroom ground floor apartment for sale at £124,950 currently, would be a suggested rent of £595 with a yield of 5.71%. Bramley, another popular area, strong community for tenants, 2-bedroom terrace there, that would be £550 a calendar month with a yield of 6.23. And not forgetting Morley. Morley's always popular. It's in the south, it's got excellent routes to the city with rail, road. It's got a good community, it's close to the M1, the M62. A 2-bedroom through terrace for £85,000 at a suggested rent of £500 per calendar month would give you a yield of 9.24. So like I say, don't hold me to that necessarily, things change, but trying to give you a flavour of what's going on around the city and where it might be good to invest. So into the more sort of serious nature of lettings, as Mark said, I think you've got to understand what it is you're wanting to do and achieve as being a landlord. And I think there's a couple of things I'd like to talk to you about now. There's compliance and what it means to be a landlord, what you need to do to conform to be that great landlord. And I know Hayden will certainly go into that in slightly more depth, I'm sure. There's agent regulation, which is something I've been pleased to see, and also the Immigration Act and the right to rent, which you might have heard of in the news. So, don't want to scare anybody with lots of certificates and such, but one of the things you need to be a landlord is a landlord gas safety certificate. That needs to be done every 12 months by a gas safe registered engineer to ensure that all the gas appliances in a property are safe. You can get that done for about £50. The next one is a portable appliance certificate. That's worth doing if you're including appliances in a property. You've got a duty of care to tenants to make sure somewhere's electrically safe. So that and a periodic inspection is absolutely essential. Next, your EPC. You can't market a property without that. Tenants are beginning to switch on a bit more about how efficient a property is. That goes into their affordability, understanding how much it's going to cost to live there. So that's critical. And then deposits. I guess everyone's heard about tenancy deposits. Since 2007, it's actually been mandatory to register these deposits with one of 3 government-approved schemes. I've put 2 on there, the TDS and the DPS, both of which we actually use. Importantly with a deposit, once you've taken that from the tenant, you've got to register it within 30 days. You've got to give them the prescribed information, which is the rule book, really, for deposits. If you don't do that, you leave yourself open to a few problems. So it's simply done. You can register that. It's not a problem. Agent regulation. Really pleased to see this come in last October. That was just a requirement for all letting agents and property managers in England to become part of one of the several redress schemes. Now at Mannings we've actually been part of those for many years. Arla particularly, a lot of our staff are all Arla members or working towards that. But that was really important, I think, to make sure that standards are there for landlords and tenants alike. And then the Immigration Act and the right to rent. This is something that's currently on trial in the West Midlands. So it's not national, it's not happening in our area yet, but I think it will do. I think it will do this year. And the government is simply making it harder for illegal immigrants to rent accommodation. The Immigration Act 2014 introduced a requirement for landlords and private rental accommodation to conduct checks to establish that new tenants have the right to rent in the UK. One of the things that we're going to do to combat this when it does come is simply put it into the referencing process of a tenant. So when we're looking at a tenant, what they look like in terms of affordability, previous landlord references, this will be done within that process. So actually it's nothing to worry about. It's something that will become part of the process for us and not actually unduly concern landlords. That's on us. I'd like to finish with some top tips. It's a theme that Mark's had. I think this does interweave a little bit. The first one, location and opportunity. There's some great yields to be had across this city. I think our investment collection in the packs you've got shows that. Some of what I've highlighted today, this evening, shows that. It's a big city, but with some of those opportunities can come some risks. And I think you've got to really analyse that. I think, I really echo Mark's sentiment about doing the research and understanding what's going on out there, what you're getting into, what it's going to look like for you. And that target tenant, really important. What's popular? 2, 3 bedroom properties, most popular. I think that certainly plays to the 20% of tenants that are families. That enables tenants to stay longer. They've got more accommodation. They can be happy, more settled. So I think that's absolutely key. Number 3, so sorry Hayden, touching a little bit here, but be law abiding. So I don't want to be there's a bad sheriff here, but you've got to know your obligations. We've talked about the gas and electrical safety. We've talked about the EPC, the deposits. Failure to comply does carry some fines, etc. But as Mark mentioned, you do your research and all of that, you know what you're getting into. It's not something that should concern us. You're prepared, you're ready for what might come. Letting your property is a business decision. Now, I speak to landlords every day, sometimes 7 days a week, and I know that people can become very attached to their properties. That's inevitable. But you've got to try and detach yourself and move out in body and in soul. I think it's important. I think if you've got items in there that are financial or sentimental value, you're best taking those with you and making sure that you're not worried about that ancient antique chest that belonged to whoever. It's really important. So see the property as an asset. It's generating an income. It will require care and maintenance, both planned and reactive from time to time, as all our homes do. It's just the nature of living in this country and storms and whatnot. Number 5, win the beauty contest. And what I mean by that is that tenants out there at the forefront of their search is the type of property, the quality of accommodation that's on offer. Tenants, I think there used to be a bit of a play around a tenant or just rent anything. Doesn't matter if it's got swirly carpets or, black walls. Trust me, it matters. It really matters. So despite those past labels, remember what today's tenant looked like. That motivated bloke covered in snow, cold and wet. I don't know how long he'd been out there for. It feel quite bad, actually. But that's a good guy. Wants another place he can settle down in. And I think if you take that condition into account, it will be reflected in your rent. Critical. So thank you for listening. I hope it's been useful.